few years back, I took a camping trip deep into the Everglades with 3 other guys. We weren't amateurs, at least not totally. Between the 4 of us, we had enough experience to keep ourselves from doing anything stupid. We'd done some Appalachian stuff a little out west, and 1 trip into the Smokies during shoulder season. But Florida was different. The Everglades weren't like anywhere else I'd camped before. The trip came together kind of last minute. It was mid-March, which was a good time to be out there. Not too hot, fewer mosquitoes than the full summer months. We planned for 3 nights in a remote elevated camping platform, one of the Chicky-style campsites the park maintains out in the backcountry, surrounded by a few dry spots of hammock forest and grassland. We wanted isolation, silence, some time to get out of our heads. The area we chose was dry for the season, but still surrounded by enough marshland to make it a bit of a haul to get into. We hiked in, rather than paddling, choosing a trail that curved away from the main canal routes. Took us the better part of a day to reach our spot. We were hauling a lot: tents, food, water for several days, machetes for trail maintenance and safety, emergency gear, and a first aid kit. There were no other groups out there, no signs of traffic. The ranger had told us that the last party to use the site had been a few days before us, and the logbook confirmed that. The place was ours. The site itself was on a raised patch of ground, maybe 3 feet above the surrounding sawgrass, ringed by cabbage palms and dwarf cypress. Solid footing, big enough for our 4 small tents, a fire ring, and room to sit around without feeling cramped. No permanent structures, just dry ground and what we carried in. We set up camp that first evening, ate a simple meal, dehydrated rice and some jerky, and settled in for the night. The Everglades have their own rhythm at night. It doesn't go quiet the way a mountain forest does. The whole place hums, clicks, and buzzes with life. Tree frogs, insects, night birds, occasional distant splashes from raccoons or wild pigs moving through shallow water. The sounds don't come from one direction. They're all around you, layered, shifting, always changing. There's a kind of comfort in it once you've been out there a while. The noise becomes normal. Silence, when it happens, feels wrong. That night, we all went to our own tents around the same time. No one said much. We were tired, a little sunburnt, a little stiff from hauling packs across soft terrain. I lay in my sleeping bag with the tent flaps cracked for air. I could hear the others rustling in their shelters. Soft thuds of elbows on sleeping pads, zippers closing, someone coughing. Beyond that, the steady pulse of the Everglades. I remember being on the edge of sleep when it started. At first, I thought I felt something more than I heard it. A low, slow vibration. Not loud, not sharp, just a deep, sustained sound that rolled underneath everything else. It didn't shake the ground, but I felt it in my chest, right behind the breastbone, like the aftershock of a loud subwoofer. It wasn't the kind of thing you hear. It was something your body picks up on before your ears register it. I froze, just listening. The sound wasn't coming from one spot. It wasn't left or right or in front or behind. It was just there, ambient, like a hum from the earth itself. And then, all at once, the Everglades went silent. It was like someone threw a switch. No frogs, no bugs, no owls, just nothing. I lay there in the dark with my heart hammering. The hairs on my arms stood straight up. I waited for a splash, or a branch to snap, or something to explain the shift. But nothing came. Just that hum, that chest-deep vibration, for another few seconds, and then that stopped, too. Total silence. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful. The kind that makes your body go rigid, that pulls your focus outward in all directions. I didn't move. I didn't even sit up. I just stayed where I was, breathing slow, straining my ears. I didn't know what I was listening for. I just knew I was listening. A few seconds later, my phone vibrated on the ground next to my head. I reached for it slowly, careful not to make noise. It was a text from my buddy 1 tent over. No punctuation. Just, "Did you hear that?" Before I could answer, another buzz came in from one of the others. Then another. All of us were awake, all of us had felt it. We started texting, short messages, nothing helpful. What was that? Anyone see anything? Still quiet. Nobody moved from their tents. Nobody got up to check. That part stayed unspoken, but it was clear. We were staying where we were. Something had changed out there, and none of us wanted to be the first one to step into it. I kept the phone in my hand, screen dimmed low, and just waited. The silence didn't break quickly. It wasn't like a switch flipping back on. Came back in pieces. First a single cricket chirping once and then stopping. Then a soft shuffle in the brush. Probably a small animal, but I couldn't place it. After that, the bugs returned, not all at once but gradually. The chorus rebuilt itself over the next 10 minutes. By the time the frogs started again, the world felt normal. But I didn't feel normal. I reached out and pulled the machete out of the sleeve beside my pad. I laid it across my chest and didn't move for a long time. I must have dozed off at some point. The next thing I remember was sunlight filtering through the mesh ceiling of my tent, and the high-pitched calls of birds moving through the canopy. It was morning. Somehow I'd slept. We didn't talk much over breakfast. There were no jokes, no stories. Everyone moved a little slower. The event hung between us, unspoken but not forgotten. We all admitted hearing it, feeling it, that deep sound and then the stillness. No one had a clear idea what it was. Theories floated around. Gator bellowing, earth tremor, plane passing at altitude. But none of those sat right. We'd all heard gators before. Their bellows are loud, wet, ragged, and echo in a specific direction. They carry differently. Plus, we were on high ground, away from visible water, and this sound wasn't close. It wasn't even really sound the way you usually think of it. It was pressure, a wave that passed through. I'd felt that kind of sensation before, but only once, standing near the base of a dam during a controlled release. You don't hear it so much as feel it ripple through your ribcage. Whatever passed by us that night felt like that, except cleaner, deeper, and directionless. We stayed the second night. No one wanted to break camp early and hike out after just one weird event. Felt like cowardice, even if none of us said it. That evening was uneventful, normal. The bugs stayed noisy. The frogs sang like they were paid to. No vibrations, no silence. I still kept the machete next to me, blade unsheathed and within reach. The third and final night passed the same. No disturbances, no texts. Still, none of us fully relaxed. We were all waiting for it to return, even if we pretended otherwise. On the fourth morning, we packed out. We cleaned the site, signed the logbook, and hiked back the way we came. It was a long, hot walk. We didn't talk much, just marched in single file with sweat soaking through our shirts. By the time we reached the gravel lot at the trailhead, we were ready to call it a wrap and move on. Still, the experience never really left me. For weeks afterward, I kept turning it over in my mind. Not just the sound or the silence, but the way everything reacted to it. The way the life in that forest responded. I've camped in bear country. I've been around moose. I've heard wolves howling. But none of those things ever made a forest shut up completely. That's a different kind of warning. That's the kind of silence that says don't move, don't breathe, something's passing through. A few people later told me it might have been a gator, but the biggest gators I've ever seen, those true giants, don't roam dry forest in the middle of the night, far from water. And even when they bellow, it doesn't explain the reaction of the entire swamp. I don't think it was a gator. I don't know what it was, but I do know what I felt. Something big, something deep, moving past where we lay, and every living thing within earshot, bugs, birds, mammals, recognized it and shut their mouths. That kind of moment changes you, not dramatically, not in a Hollywood way, but in a quiet, deep down way, where your instincts remember things your brain can't explain, where some animal part of you knows what danger feels like, even if you never see it. I still camp. I still hike. I've been back to the Everglades since, though not to that exact site. But I carry a little more edge now. I trust the forest less, or maybe I just respect it more, and I never sleep without a blade within reach. I've been living and working in South Africa for almost a decade now, mostly as a field researcher and wildlife tracker. My job takes me deep into the bush, sometimes for weeks at a time, and while it might seem wild or reckless to most people, it's just become part of my routine. You learn to live around the animals, not in fear of them, but with constant awareness. You learn how they move, what they avoid, where they rest, and how to read the signs they leave behind. You don't ever stop being cautious, but you also stop being surprised by much. At least I thought I had. It was winter, the kind of winter night where the air feels like it scrapes your skin off when the wind picks up. I'd been out for 5 days already, collecting motion camera data from several sites around the Lowveld. My pack was light, just the basics: tent, sleeping bag, small stove, dried food, water filter. The usual. I'd set up camp near a rocky outcrop that overlooked a dry riverbed. It was a spot I'd used before. Relatively safe, open enough to see anything coming, with no signs of large predator activity in the area over the past few days. That night, I ate early, boiled water for a warm drink, and climbed into my sleeping bag well before dark. I was cold, tired, and ready to sleep. The tent I use is compact, barely tall enough to sit upright in, with thin canvas walls and a mesh window on either side. It's not protection in any real sense, more of a windbreak than anything, but it keeps the bugs out and holds a bit of heat. I fell asleep facing the tent wall, curled slightly on my side. The ground was hard, the air sharp and still. My sleeping bag was zipped tight, my jacket still on inside it. I was in that shallow part of sleep, not fully under but just resting enough to feel time passing. That's when I felt it, just the smallest change in pressure against my back. At first, I thought it was the sleeping bag shifting, maybe a fold of fabric adjusting under my weight. But then it pressed again, more solid this time. Heavy, broad, warm. It didn't feel threatening, just there. Solid, soft, warm, like someone had laid a blanket over my back, but with weight to it, and slow, steady breathing. My first thought, absurdly, was of my cat. Back home, she curls up behind me in bed when it's cold. She pushes into the curve of my back, purring, and settles in for the night. For a weird moment, still caught in the fog of sleep, I thought that's what this was. My cat, comforting warmth. Then my mind caught up. I didn't have a cat here. I was alone, in a tent, in the bush. I held completely still. I didn't twitch. I didn't breathe too hard. I just listened. The warmth against my back wasn't moving much, but it was there. Something breathing, slow and deep, with a chest that rose and fell steadily, like sleep. I could feel each breath through the fabric of the tent. The wall was barely thicker than a jacket. I realized I could hear faint exhales, wet, warm air moving in and out. The thing wasn't snoring, just breathing deeply, calmly. I stayed frozen for what felt like an hour. My back was rigid. My heart was thudding so hard I was sure it could hear it. But I didn't move, didn't want to provoke anything. Eventually, I started to shift my eyes toward the side mesh of the tent. Slowly as I could, I rolled one shoulder forward, just enough to let my eyes find the corner of the window. It was still dark out, stars above, no movement, nothing visible, but the weight remained. The breathing continued. I started thinking through options. Making noise? Too risky. Bolting from the tent? Unzip the bag. Open the flap. Run? No chance. Whatever it was could crush me before I got 2 steps out. So I waited. The night crawled by. My body started to cramp from staying in the same position. My arms tingled from the tension. My mouth was dry, but I didn't want to move enough to drink water. Eventually, sometime just before dawn, the breathing changed. It got shallower, more alert. The weight shifted. Slowly, it lifted. I felt the pressure ease off my back. Then I heard the faintest noise. Padded movement, soft but definite. Footsteps. I turned my head just slightly, enough to see through the mesh. A shape moved through the gray light of morning. Massive. Low. It didn't hurry. It moved like it belonged, like it owned the earth under its paws. A full-maned lion, walking slowly away from the tent. I couldn't see its face, just the outline of muscle, tail, mane. It didn't look back. I stayed in the tent until full light. Then I got out, cautiously, standing slowly and scanning the surroundings. I checked the ground beside the tent. Sure enough, there were prints, fresh, unmistakable. One of them was close enough to touch. Massive paw marks in the cold dust, just beside where I had slept. I followed them for a few meters just to be sure. They led off into the bush, away from the ridge. No signs of stalking, no kill nearby, just a path casually walked. He'd come, lain down against the tent wall, probably drawn by the heat from my body, and stayed the night, like a giant, wild cat seeking comfort in the cold. I packed up in silence. I didn't bother making breakfast or tea, just got everything into the bag, loaded it up, and hiked back toward the vehicle, a few kilometers away. I checked my back every few steps. I wasn't scared exactly, just very aware. The bush had reminded me again how thin the barrier really is, how fragile we are out there. Back at the station, I washed up and logged the data, but I kept thinking about it. I slept with a lion, not near one, not in the same general area. I'd shared body heat with it through a millimeter of fabric, and it hadn't harmed me, could have, easily, but it didn't. That night, in the cold silence of the bush, a lion had curled up against my back, like a house cat, seeking warmth, maybe comfort, and then it left. It reminded me that no matter how wild something is, no matter how dangerous, sometimes it just wants to feel safe too, to feel warm, to rest. I still go out, still camp, still sleep in the same tent. But I never forget that night. I never forget how close wildness came. Not with teeth or claws, but with breath and weight and a kind of quiet trust. And every now and then, when I feel the cold pressing in while I sleep alone in the dark, I remember the warmth of that night. The lion against my back, breathing, sleeping, and walking away. I'd been looking forward to this solo trip for a while. Work had been grinding me down, and my weekends were starting to blend together. Errands, cleaning, emails, sleep, nothing exciting. So when I finally got a few days off in a row, I loaded up my truck and decided to head out into one of the valleys I'd read about in an old trail guide. It wasn't one of the more popular spots. That's what I wanted. No crowds, no sounds of other people talking on speakerphone 2 campsites over. No pressure to be social. Just me, the river, some good beer, and a few downloaded podcasts. I got there late in the afternoon. The road into the valley was mostly dirt and gravel, but it wasn't anything my truck couldn't handle. Cell service cut out not long after I passed the last set of mailboxes along the main highway, and I didn't see another car once I was on that side road. I liked that. Felt like I had stepped off the grid in a good way. I parked at a trailhead and hiked a few miles in with a small day pack. The trail followed the edge of a ridge for a while before descending through some old pine forest into the valley itself. It was quiet down there, just the crunch of my boots and the sound of the wind moving through dry grass. Around dusk, I started to realize I had probably stayed out a little too long. I wasn't panicking, but I didn't really want to hike back in the dark, either. That's when I met the guy. He came up the trail behind me, carrying a small pack and moving at an easy pace. I didn't hear him until he was only a few steps back, which startled me a little. But when I turned and saw him, he didn't set off any red flags. He looked like someone who knew the area well. Worn boots, sun-leathered face, and that casual, unbothered energy you only really see in people who spend a lot of time outdoors. He asked where I was headed, and I told him I was planning to camp somewhere near the river, maybe back closer to the road since it was getting dark. He nodded and mentioned a spot that wasn't on the map, close to the road, near the water, but mostly hidden from view thanks to thick brush and a small drop in the terrain. I probably wouldn't have found it on my own. I figured I'd take him up on the suggestion. He pointed the direction and moved on without much small talk. That was fine with me. I hiked down and found the spot about 20 minutes later. He hadn't been lying, it was perfect. A flat patch surrounded by willows and small pines, maybe 30 yards from the river and not far from where I had parked. You wouldn't be able to see it from the road or the trail unless you were really looking. I had enough light left to gather some firewood and get a small fire going. I set up a little folding chair, cracked a beer, and started one of my friend's comedy podcasts. I guess I was being louder than I realized. I had the speaker going, I was laughing a bit too loud, and the fire was throwing a lot of light. If anyone was nearby, they would have known I was there. It was already dark when I finished my second beer. I looked over at my tent, which was still folded up in the back of the truck, and thought about whether I wanted to go through the hassle of setting it up. I wasn't drunk, but I was buzzed enough to feel lazy. Besides, it wasn't cold, and I had a blanket, so I figured I'd just crash in the truck bed under my topper. All my gear was back there anyway. It wasn't the first time I'd done that, and it was always easier to pack up in the morning when you hadn't bothered to pitch a tent. I slid into the back of the truck, closed the tailgate and hatch, and curled up next to my gear with my knife tucked into the folds of the blanket and the bear spray within arm's reach. That's just how I always did it, habit. I passed out fast. At some point in the night, I stirred awake. I don't know what time it was. It was pitch black and my fire had gone out. I didn't hear anything in particular, but I remember having this strange sense that something had shifted outside. I held still, listening. No voices, no footsteps, not even an animal scuffling through the brush. Just wind and the faint sound of the river. I told myself it was nothing and went back to sleep. When the morning light started breaking through the trees, I climbed out of the truck and stretched. It was one of those crisp, quiet mornings that make you glad you got out into nature. I started a small fire again, more for the feeling of it than for warmth. I cracked a fresh beer and pulled out my little camp stove to make some eggs and sausage. I wasn't in a rush to leave. I figured I'd enjoy the morning, maybe explore a bit before heading home in the afternoon. That's when I noticed him. At first, I thought I was seeing things, just some movement in the trees. But then I realized there was a man standing at the edge of my camp, maybe 15 feet away. He was just outside the circle of my fire, close enough that I could make out the shape of him, but far enough that I couldn't see his eyes clearly. He was facing sort of sideways, not directly at me, just kind of looming there. Still, he didn't say anything, didn't make any sound at all. He looked like he hadn't bathed in months. He had a long, dirty beard, layers of clothes that looked like they'd been dragged through a dumpster, and I swear, plastic grocery bags were tied all over his jacket and pants. Dozens of them, hanging off of him like streamers or feathers. Some were white, some blue, some clear. At least 100, rustling softly in the wind. I just froze. I wasn't sure what to do at first. It's one thing to see another camper or hiker. It's another to have someone just standing there like that, not saying a word, not even looking directly at me. My mind started scanning through scenarios. Maybe he was homeless. Maybe he lived out here. Maybe he was high, or mentally ill. Or maybe this was something worse. I tried to keep my tone casual, even though I felt like my spine was tightening. I said something about how nice the day was. Nothing from him, not even a blink. He didn't move. I offered him some of my breakfast. Still nothing. He started slowly walking around the perimeter of my sight, like he was pacing a circle. Not looking at me, just wandering. Not fast, not aggressive. Just weird. The kind of weird that doesn't feel random. The kind that feels like there's something simmering beneath it, like someone playing dumb on purpose. I stood up. I didn't want to escalate anything, but I didn't want to sit there waiting for him to make the next move. I offered him a beer. He turned his back to me and kept walking in his slow, circling pattern. He was less than 10 feet away now. I had my bear spray on the tailgate. My knife was in my pocket. My keys were on the stove. I picked up the bear spray and held it down by my side. He just kept pacing, not reacting. Still no eye contact. Still no words. Just that rustling of the plastic bags. That's all I could hear now. That and my own heart starting to pound in my ears. I started talking again. More like warning him this time. I told him he needed to either acknowledge me or leave. Still nothing. Like I wasn't even there. He didn't flinch. Didn't glance at me. Just kept moving like he was in his own world. That's when I took a few steps toward him, the bear spray raised and ready. He paused. Finally. Then he started walking away. Not fast. Not scared. Just slowly, back toward the trees, his back still turned to me, plastic bags rustling in the breeze. I didn't wait to see where he went. I grabbed my gear, dumped my food and coffee water on the fire, and threw everything into the back of the truck. I didn't even fold up the stove, just tossed it in and slammed the tailgate shut. I peeled out of there, gravel spraying behind me, and didn't look back until I hit the highway. Only once I was a few miles out did I start to calm down. That tightness in my chest slowly loosened, but I couldn't stop glancing in the rearview mirror. The image of that guy just standing there, expressionless, surrounded by rustling plastic, had burned into my head. I kept wondering what he was doing, why he was there, how long he might have been watching me, whether he'd seen my firelight from the trail the night before, whether he'd been standing out there in the dark while I was sleeping, maybe even circling my truck while I was inside. I kept running that part through my mind, the decision not to pitch my tent. If I had, I would have been out there on the ground, in the open, totally vulnerable. I wouldn't have heard him coming, wouldn't have known anything until maybe it was too late. The truck was the only thing between me and whatever intentions he had, and I kept thinking how strange it was that my laziness had probably kept me safer than all my planning ever could have. Even now, whenever I think about camping alone, I always go back to that morning. It wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, but something about it was more terrifying than any close encounter with a bear or a storm or getting lost ever was. It was the silence, the stillness, the feeling of being watched by someone who didn't want to be seen. I haven't camped solo since. Not because I'm scared of the woods. I'm not. I still love the quiet, the rivers, the trails, the wind through the trees. But now I'm aware of what else can be out there. What kind of people might be living just out of sight. Watching, waiting. And next time, if there is a next time, I won't be so quick to ignore that kind of silence. I won't sleep with the fire out. And I sure as hell won't assume that just because someone looks like a local, they're just another friendly face on the trail. Some people don't need a reason to scare you. They just do, just by being there. And that's enough. I've been working as a safari guide in the Lowveld region of South Africa for close to 8 years now. Winters here can be harsh. The landscape dries out, the nights get bone cold, and the mornings often start with a thin layer of frost covering everything, especially down in the riverbeds. It's a place I know well, and I've come to respect its rhythms, its moods, and above all, its dangers. But nothing prepared me for what happened on one winter night out in the bush. We were doing a 2-night trail, just myself and one other guide, with no guests on this particular trip. It was meant to be a bit of downtime for us, a chance to walk a known route, keep an eye on the seasonal changes, maybe prep for future trails. It was something we did every now and then, sort of like a reset.
No radios, no fansas, no vehicles.
Just the bush, our backpacks, and whatever we could carry. We'd set off early the morning before, walked for a few hours, tracked some fresh leopard prints along the river's edge, spotted a few elephant herds in the distance, and eventually found a small, open patch near a kopje, one of those big rock outcroppings that we'd used before as a camp spot. It had a decent view, good lines of sight, and no thick bush nearby for anything to sneak up through. Or so we thought. That night, the temperature dropped fast after sunset. The wind carried the chill straight through our jackets. We'd had a small fire going for warmth, but doused it early to avoid attracting too much attention. We always camped light, just small 2-man tents, no heavy canvas or raised cots, nothing that would feel too separate from the environment. We weren't trying to insulate ourselves from the bush. We were trying to be in it, with it. I remember going to sleep that night bundled up inside my sleeping bag, wearing a beanie, a thermal shirt, fleece, and even my boots. It was that cold. The ground underneath was hard-packed earth with a few flattened tufts of dry grass. Not exactly comfortable, but familiar. I zipped the tent all the way, tucking the edges of the sleeping bag under my arms to keep the heat in, curled slightly on my side, and fell asleep to the usual sounds of the night. Crickets, distant hyenas, the occasional grunt of a hippo from a nearby waterhole. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, before dawn, I started to come out of sleep. You know that foggy space when you're still half dreaming but also aware something feels different? That's where I was. I was warm, very warm, in fact, warmer than I should have been. The cold that had crept into my bones the night before was gone, replaced by something almost comfortable. But it wasn't just warmth. There was also weight. Something heavy was pressing gently against my back. Not crushing, just firm, soft even, and it was slowly rising and falling, like breathing. took me a few seconds to piece it together. My sleeping bag was zipped, my back was toward the outer wall of the tent, and whatever this warmth was, it was outside, but it was big. The curve of it matched the curve of my back, and it wasn't moving much. My heart started to race, but I kept still. The canvas of the tent is thin. It's not made to be a barrier against wildlife. It's more of a symbolic shell than anything else. I started to listen, really listen. My breathing slowed, and I strained to hear past the sound of my own pulse thumping in my ears. Nothing.
No footsteps, no groveling, no sniffing.
Just this presence. And then, softly, from about 10 meters away, I heard a voice. A whisper, hoarse and uneasy. It was my fellow guide in his tent. He said my name. I didn't reply right away. I waited. The air was completely still. The kind of silence that only happens when everything in the bush holds its breath at once. Then I answered. Not loudly, but louder than I probably should have. Just a quiet, yeah. I think I thought maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was overreacting. The second I spoke, I felt the weight lift from behind me. There was a pause, just one heartbeat long, and then I heard the sound of paws. Heavy ones, padding across the dry ground. Not running, just purposeful, solid strides. I turned very slightly, just enough to see through the mesh window on the side of the tent. I saw it, a big male lion, dark mane, broad shoulders, walking away slowly, not even looking back. I don't know how long he had been lying there, minutes, hours, but he had used the side of my tent, my body, for warmth, probably drawn to the heat, or maybe just the shelter from the wind. And until I spoke, he hadn't moved. I didn't sleep the rest of that morning. I lay there frozen, every nerve on edge. The lion disappeared into the bush and didn't come back, but my mind replayed the moment again and again. It wasn't the fear of being attacked that stuck with me. It was the fact that I never heard him arrive. Not a sound. That thing had walked right up to my tent and laid down against me without me knowing. I'm supposed to be a guide. I'm trained to notice things, to read signs, to hear movement. And still, he got that close. When the sun came up, we broke camp. No fire, no breakfast. We packed in silence. We checked for tracks, and sure enough, there they were. Big, clear paw prints, right up against my tent. His body had left a shallow depression in the dry grass. You could see the shape of him. My tent wall had a faint smudge of dust where his side had pressed into it. We found more prints leading off into the bush, toward the riverbank. We hiked back to the station that day. Neither of us said much. It wasn't just fear that had shaken me. It was the reminder of how thin the line is out there. You spend enough time in the wild and you start to believe you're part of it, that you've got a feel for it, that you know the rules. But the bush doesn't care what you know. It doesn't care how experienced you are. You make one wrong move, speak one word too loud, and you break the balance. That lion could have killed me without effort. One swipe, one bite, and I'd have bled out before help ever got close. But he didn't. He walked away. He got what he needed, a bit of warmth, and moved on. After that night, I started sleeping lighter. I adjusted how I pitched my tent, always away from game trails or animal paths. I kept a metal cup by my side. Something to rattle, not to fight with, just to make noise. I never again replied to anything in the dark without checking my surroundings first. I kept guiding. I still do, but I carry that night with me now. Changed something. Not in a dramatic way, not in a my life flashed before my eyes kind of way. Just in the quiet, unsettling way that only the bush can teach you. That no matter how careful you are, how much you know, or how many trails you've walked, out here you're never fully in control. Sometimes the wild just comes up and lies down beside you. And if you're lucky, it gets up and walks away. I was about 14, maybe 15 when this happened. Back then, camping was something my family did a lot, especially during the summer and early fall. We lived in a quiet suburb in the Midwest, and there was a state park about an hour and a half away where we'd spend a few weekends every year. It wasn't remote wilderness, but it was far enough from towns and roads that when night came, the darkness felt thick, and the quietness made you feel like the world shrunk down to just your flashlight beam and your own footsteps. My parents would usually pick one of the bigger sites, enough room for 2 tents, one for them and one for me and my younger brother. But my friend Evan came with us on that trip. His family knew mine well, and our parents figured we were old enough to handle our own little corner of the woods, so they let us have a tent to ourselves. That state park was a familiar place. By then, Evan and I had walked the trails dozens of times, gone fishing in the little lake, biked the gravel roads. We even gave names to some of the spots we'd always pass, like the Hollow Tree or Dead Root Bend. But the thing we looked forward to most every time was what we called the ritual. It wasn't really anything important or planned. It was just what we named our habit of walking out into the woods after dark with our flashlights off and seeing how far we could go before one of us got spooked or twisted an ankle or gave in and turned the light back on. That night, we were 2 days into the trip. It was early fall. The bugs weren't so bad, and the air had that chilly snap in it once the sun went down. After dinner, the adults sat around the fire with their drinks, and Evan and I waited until the sky was black before heading out. We had 2 flashlights in our jacket pockets, but like usual, we didn't use them. Our eyes had adjusted pretty well to the darkness. The moon was out, just a sliver, and the stars helped a little. We stuck to the trail at first, walking in silence. It was our unspoken rule not to talk during the ritual. Something about the silence made it creepier, made it feel more like a test of who could handle the quiet and the dark longer. We walked maybe 10 or 15 minutes, farther than usual. The trail split at a low wooden sign, and instead of turning back like we often did, we decided to go left, where it led deeper into the woods. The ground was uneven, roots sticking up in weird spots, and the trees grew tighter together here, like no one used this part of the trail much anymore. We were probably half a mile from the campground when we both stopped at the same time. I thought I heard something behind us, soft, like a breath or someone brushing leaves with a shoe. It wasn't sharp enough to know for sure, just a faint whisper of sound that made the hairs on my neck rise. I reached for my flashlight and flicked it on, spinning around to look behind us. Evan did the same. Nothing, just trees, leaves, and more trees. I shined the light into the underbrush, checked the trail behind us, scanned the low shrubs and the spaces between the trunks. Everything was still. No breeze, no animals, not even a cricket. We looked at each other for a second. I could tell Evan heard it too, but didn't want to say anything, like we were both pretending we hadn't been spooked. We turned the lights back off and kept walking, slower now, more careful with our steps. Not even a minute later, we heard it again. This time, it wasn't a noise so much as a feeling, like something was following just far enough behind us to stay in the dark. I remember how tense my shoulders got, how every little sound, like the crunch of a leaf or the creak of a tree branch above us, felt exaggerated. We stopped again. I turned on my light, and this time we scanned slower, more deliberately. That's when we saw her. It took a second for my eyes to understand what I was looking at. She was low to the ground, crawling. Not fast, not stumbling, just crawling slowly through the dirt on her hands and knees. Her clothes were dark and loose, like sweatpants and a hoodie, but they were covered in dirt and leaves, almost like she'd been laying in the mud for a while. She wasn't looking at us. She was facing the ground, head low, whispering to herself. I couldn't understand the words. It didn't even sound like words really, just a soft, steady muttering. I felt my chest tighten, like I forgot how to breathe for a second. The way she moved didn't look right. There was no urgency, no fear, just this weird, slow, slinking motion, like she didn't even care we were there. Then she looked up. She didn't jump or flinch. She just lifted her head slowly, like someone waking up from a dream. Her face was streaked with dirt, and her eyes were wide, unfocused, not really looking at us but through us. I could see her lips moving, still whispering. Then she stood. It wasn't sudden or violent. She just rose to her feet, stiffly, like it was hard to balance, like she hadn't stood in a while. Her knees wobbled, and she put one foot forward, swaying slightly. She looked around in a slow circle, blinking like she was trying to figure out where she was. I remember thinking that something was wrong with how her arms hung at her sides. Her fingers were curled like claws, not in a threatening way but in a weirdly unnatural way, like they were frozen or locked up. Her skin looked too tight, her neck too long. She scratched her shoulder absently with one hand, not even noticing we were still standing there with flashlights on her. Then she started walking toward us. I didn't move. I didn't even think. I just watched her come forward, her steps uneven, dragging a little. Evan backed up a step and bumped into me. I felt his arm press against mine and realized how tense I was, how I hadn't even breathed since she stood up. She stopped a few feet away and stared past us down the trail. I could smell her. Sweat, dirt, and something else, like rotting leaves or a wet dog that hadn't been washed in months. Her mouth opened like she was about to say something, but no sound came out. She blinked slowly again, swaying a little. Then she turned and walked the way we'd come. Evan finally moved, stepping forward beside her, not touching her, just walking with her. I followed. We didn't say anything. We just stayed with her, keeping pace as she moved slowly down the trail, back toward the campgrounds. She didn't stumble or fall, but she didn't seem steady either. Every now and then, she'd stop for a second, look around blankly, then keep walking. When we reached the edge of the campground, she froze again. The fire from our parents' site was visible in the distance, and there were a few other tents scattered nearby. She stood there for a long moment before walking toward one of the sites near the edge. There was a group of people around a small fire, maybe in their 20s. She walked straight into their site and sat down on a cooler like it was the most normal thing in the world. One of them noticed her and looked surprised, then laughed. Someone handed her a bottle of water. A few others stared like they had just noticed she'd been missing. We kept walking, not saying a word until we got back to our own site. Our parents were still up, talking around the fire. We didn't tell them. I think we were both still trying to make sense of what we saw. The next morning, I saw her again, walking near the bathhouse. She looked completely normal. Clean clothes, hair brushed, even holding a cup of coffee. She didn't look our way. She just walked past like she didn't remember anything from the night before. Evan and I talked about it once, years later. He said he still remembered how her hands looked, the way she crawled like she wasn't human. I never forgot the whispering, or how wide her eyes were when she looked up. We figured she had to be drunk or high or maybe sleepwalking, but something about it still didn't sit right. It wasn't just that she was lost or acting strange. It was the way she moved, the way her body didn't seem like it belonged to her, like she was trying to remember how to be a person. Looking back, I think we caught her in a moment where she wasn't fully herself. Maybe drugs, maybe mental illness, maybe something else. It didn't matter what the cause was. What mattered was that if we hadn't been out there, she might have wandered deeper into the woods, maybe never come back. We never did the ritual again after that. The next night, we stayed near the fire. The woods didn't feel the same anymore. It wasn't about being scared of the dark or trying to prove how brave we were. It was that we saw something real, something human, but just barely. And that was a lot scarier than anything we ever imagined. When I was younger, probably around 14 or 15, my family used to go camping a lot during the summers. We didn't have a ton of money, and camping was one of the few things we could all do together that didn't cost much. My parents liked to keep it simple: tents, coolers, folding chairs, and meals cooked over the fire. We usually camped at state parks not too far from home, usually within a 2-hour drive, and we'd stay for about a week at a time. I have a lot of memories from those trips, some good, some boring, and one in particular that still sticks with me in a way that I've never really been able to shake. That summer, we went to a park we'd been to before, a place with a big lake, fishing docks, and long trails that looped through thick woods. There were a lot of campsites, but they were spaced out in a way that you had some privacy. It wasn't one of those packed campgrounds where you could hear your neighbor sneeze through their tent. Most of the sites had trees on at least 3 sides, and only one side open toward the gravel road that ran through the park. I brought my friend Ryan with me that year. He and I had grown up a few houses apart and had spent almost every summer afternoon biking around town or hanging out in each other's basements. Camping with him made the trip feel more like an adventure. We didn't have phones back then, or if we did, they weren't the kind that did anything useful. There was no social media, no GPS, just flashlights, bikes, and whatever snacks we brought with us. Ryan and I had this thing we called the ritual. It sounds dumb now, but it was just what we named our nightly walks through the woods. Every night after dinner and esmores, when the adults were winding down around the fire, we'd grab our flashlights and sneak off into the woods. We liked the feeling of being out there alone. It was always quiet, and the woods felt like they went on forever. We stuck to the trails at first, but over time we started wandering off more, just exploring whatever paths we could find. It became our challenge to see how far we could go without needing the flashlights. It made everything more intense, more fun. That night was like the others at first. We ate dinner with our families, hot dogs and chips, and hung around the fire until it got dark enough to see the stars. I remember the air felt heavy, not hot, just thick like it sometimes gets in the summer when there's no wind. The fire had burned low, and everyone else was either roasting marshmallows or chatting quietly. Ryan and I gave each other a look and grabbed our lights. No one stopped us. They never really worried about us. We never went that far, and we always came back before it got too late. We started on the main trail near our campsite, the one that looped around a small hill and cut through a patch of forest that was mostly pine. The needles on the ground made it soft to walk, so even when we weren't trying to be quiet, our footsteps didn't make much sound. We turned the lights off after about a minute and walked side by side, trusting our eyes to adjust. The moon was out, but not full, maybe a half moon or so. Just enough light to see the trail, but not much beyond that. We kept walking, pushing deeper into the woods. After a while, the trees started getting denser, and the trail narrowed. It was clear no one had walked this far recently. Branches leaned over the path, and spiderwebs brushed our faces. We kept our lights off anyway. That was the point. We liked the thrill of it. We were maybe a half mile from the nearest campsite when I thought I heard something behind us. Just a soft sound, almost like someone whispering. I stopped and turned my head slightly, not wanting to make it obvious I was spooked. Ryan must have heard it too, because he stopped at the same time. I clicked my light on and turned around. Nothing, just trees and more darkness. He did the same, sweeping his flashlight back over the path behind us, scanning between the trees. We didn't say anything. We just kind of stood there for a few seconds, listening. The sound was gone. We figured it was just our imaginations. It wouldn't have been the first time we spooked ourselves out there. Sometimes animals made weird noises, or the wind moved the trees in strange ways. Whatever it was, it didn't seem like a big deal. So we kept walking a little slower this time. About 2 minutes later, we heard it again, whispering. But it wasn't just a sound anymore, it was words. Soft, jumbled, not making sense. Like someone was muttering random thoughts under their breath. Just loud enough to hear if you were close. But it didn't sound like it was close. It sounded like it was following us, but always staying just a few steps back. Like it was moving when we moved. This time we both stopped and really listened. I turned my light back on and scanned the woods behind us again. Ryan did the same, sweeping side to side. At first we didn't see anything, just trees and shadows. But then something moved low to the ground, near a tree about 20 feet away. I aimed my beam directly at it. It was a person, a woman, crawling. She was wearing dark clothes, but they were torn in places, and she was covered in dirt. Her hair was tangled and messy, hanging in her face. She moved like she was trying to stay low, like she didn't want to be seen. But the second my light hit her, she froze. She didn't look up right away, just stayed crouched there, whispering to herself in a string of random words. Nonsense stuff, the kind of things someone might say in a dream. Ryan and I didn't move. We just stared. It didn't feel real at first. Then she stood up, slowly, like every joint in her body had to be convinced to work. She wobbled a little and looked right at us. Even from that distance, I could see her eyes. They weren't wide or scared, just empty, like there was no focus, like she was there but not really there. She said something about looking for her campsite. Her voice was slow and slurred, like every word was hard to get out. She kept looking past us, like she expected her campsite to be somewhere in the woods ahead. Even though we both knew there was nothing that way for miles. We didn't know what to do. We weren't trained for anything like this. We were just two teenagers trying to scare ourselves in the woods. I remember my first instinct was to run, but she didn't seem threatening, just confused, lost. We didn't say much, we didn't have to. We both just slowly turned around and started walking back the way we came, shining our flashlights on the trail. We didn't look back much, but we could hear her behind us, her footsteps uneven, like she was limping or staggering. She kept mumbling, sometimes stopping, then hurrying to catch up. A few times we had to stop and wait for her to get moving again. Took a long time to get back. The trail felt different. Every sound stood out. Every rustle in the trees made my heart jump. I kept thinking she might just disappear again into the woods, or worse, do something unpredictable. But she just followed. When we finally made it back to the first campsites, we felt safer. There were lanterns glowing, fires crackling, people talking in the distance. We led her down the gravel road that looped around the campground, trying to find anyone who recognized her. She didn't give us any help, just kept walking and occasionally whispering. We must have walked her past 5 or 6 campsites before someone finally said they thought she was with a group a few rows down. Sure enough, when we brought her over there, a couple of people recognized her right away. One of them laughed like it was funny that she'd wandered off. Another looked annoyed, like she'd done this before. Nobody seemed too surprised. We stood there while they got her some water and helped her sit down. From what we gathered just listening, she had been drinking pretty heavily and maybe taking something else. She'd gone looking for the bathroom and never came back. No one had even noticed she was gone for over an hour. It hit me then how badly that could have gone. If Ryan and I hadn't walked that far into the woods, if we had turned around early, or if we had ignored the sounds thinking it was just animals or our imagination, she might have spent the entire night out there, alone, wandering in circles or laying down somewhere and not waking up. We didn't stay long after that, just nodded at the group and walked back to our own campsite. When we got there, the fire was still going. Our parents didn't ask where we'd been. They probably assumed we were just doing our usual walk. Ryan and I didn't talk much about it that night. We sat at the edge of the firelight for a while, just letting the sounds of the woods settle in again. Everything felt different now. The trees weren't just background noise. The darkness wasn't just something to push through for fun. It felt real, heavy, alive in a way we hadn't noticed before. I think that was the last time we did the ritual. Not because we were scared exactly, but because something about that night made us realize how thin the line was between playing around and getting into real trouble. It was exciting to creep through the woods with no lights, pretending we were explorers or adventurers. But the moment we saw that woman crawling through the dirt, whispering to herself in the dark, it all changed. I never forgot that night. It wasn't just creepy because of how it started. It was creepy because it was real. There was no monster in the woods, no ghost, no creature hiding behind the trees. Just a woman, lost, barely functioning, out of her mind, and no one even noticed she was gone. She could have died out there, and we would have never known. It was spring break of 1985. I was 20 years old, halfway through my second year of college, and running on fumes from back-to-back exams. My head was buzzing from weeks of too little sleep and too much caffeine. So when Mark brought up the idea of a raft trip down a river that cut through Native American reservation land, I jumped on it. So did 4 others. There were 6 of us total. All college kids, all guys, all of us in our early 20s. We didn't care much about grades or futures just then. We cared about getting away, being outside, and maybe having a few beers under the stars with no one around to tell us what time to wake up. I don't remember who picked the river or how we even got the permit, but we had one. That was important, since the river ran through sovereign land, and we didn't want to mess around with local enforcement or piss off the wrong people. We wanted a good, clean trip. Nothing illegal, nothing disrespectful. Just water, trees, and sky. We packed everything into 2 station wagons and a battered pickup, drove out a full day and part of the next, parked at the drop-off point where the river was wide and slow. It looked calm, glassy. The current was there, but it didn't pull hard. We had 2 inflatable rafts and 1 hard canoe we took turns paddling. The plan was to float and paddle downriver for 6 days, camping along the banks or on sandbars at night, and end at a boat ramp we'd scouted on a map, where Mark's cousin would meet us with the pickup. The first few days were easy. The current helped, and when it didn't, we paddled in 2s or 3s while the others rested or fished. We kept our gear waterproofed in barrels and bags, lashed down tight. Each of us had our own tent or bivvy, some shared to save space. We cooked simple meals: beans, rice, dried vegetables, tortillas, pasta, boiled river water we'd filtered, and kept our trash sealed. We'd read up on how to act respectfully while on reservation land. No wandering, no trespassing up the banks, no loud noise, no leaving anything behind, and we tried to follow it to the letter. We didn't even use firewood from the shore. We brought our own. There were some long stretches of silence during the day, the kind where the only sounds were paddles dipping into water and the occasional bird overhead. Then, there were nights with distant coyote yelps and insects buzzing so loud they felt like they were inside your ears. The air would be warm until the sun dipped below the tree line, then dropped fast. Most nights we were so tired we passed out right after dinner. But on the 4th night, I stayed up. That's when things changed. That day, we'd made better time than expected. The river looped and twisted a lot, but the current had been stronger, and we didn't waste much time on lunch. We found a gravel bar at a bend in the river that looked like a perfect spot. Dry, a bit elevated, surrounded by willow scrub. Across from us, the bank rose sharply into tree-thick hills. You couldn't see more than a few feet in that direction. I didn't like that part much, but we weren't planning to cross over. Dinner was quick that night: ramen and canned chicken, followed by some trail mix. A few of the guys smoked a little weed, then crawled into their tents. The stars were already popping out. It was a no-moon night, and the air was dry and clean, so they shined like something out of a postcard. I wasn't ready for sleep, not with a sky like that overhead. I laid out my foam pad just outside my tent and propped myself on my elbows, watching the constellations rise. It was dead quiet. No frogs, no coyotes that night, no wind. I could hear my own breath. I lay there for maybe an hour, trying to pick out constellations I barely remembered from a book my uncle gave me as a kid. Orion, Ursa Major, Cassiopeia, and maybe Scorpius low near the horizon. I didn't have a telescope, not even binoculars, just my eyes and the dark. Then I saw it. I wasn't even looking for anything. I had just turned my head toward the far western edge of the horizon when the sky lit up with this giant, no, massive white light. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Not like a shooting star or even those big, slow meteors that burn for a second or two. This was bright, too bright. It wasn't like looking at the sun, but it cast shadows, even with no moon. The light didn't flicker or pulse. It was solid and blinding, and it was moving. I sat up. At first, I didn't process what I was seeing. It looked like something big, bigger than the moon, or maybe just closer, gliding silently across the sky. A long, slow arc. It wasn't a plane. No blinking lights, no sound. No jet stream or engine roar. It was faster than any plane I'd ever seen, but slower than a shooting star. A weird middle speed, like it wasn't rushing but had somewhere it definitely needed to be. It took at least a minute, maybe more, to pass from one horizon to the other. About 5 seconds after I first saw it, my brain kicked in. I realized this thing wasn't stopping. It wasn't disappearing after a second like a meteor. It was still going. That's when I started yelling. I must have shouted 3 or 4 times, just incoherent stuff, calling out to the others, trying to get someone to wake up and see it. But by the time anyone unzipped their tents, it was already low in the eastern sky and fading. Then it dipped below the tree line, gone. No sound, no explosion, just gone. The silence afterward was strange. Even the insects had stopped. I stood there, heart hammering in my chest. Not cold exactly, but with a feeling like the air around me had changed. Like whatever that was had charged the space, then left it hollow. I didn't know what to think. One of the guys grumbled from his tent, but no one else really got up. They hadn't seen it. I tried to explain what I'd seen the next morning, but they just nodded and half listened while breaking down camp. I don't blame them. I wouldn't have believed it either, not if I hadn't seen it myself. The rest of the trip was quiet. We paddled the last stretch in silence more than once. I kept looking at the sky, but nothing else showed up. Just stars, just clouds some nights. We reached the pickup point a day later and loaded up. I tried to find news about it when we got back to town. Checked the local paper, asked a professor in the physics department. Nothing. No reports. Not even a whisper. Now, 40 years later, I know it was probably a meteor. A big one, coming in at the right angle, burning white as it skipped off the atmosphere or plunged through. Maybe even space junk, something big breaking apart, burning clean. But the way it moved, smooth, silent, steady, still doesn't sit right with me. It wasn't like any meteor I've seen since. And I've seen a few. I'm an old man now. I've seen a lot. Still, I think about that night more often than I care to admit. Not because I think it was aliens or anything dumb like that. Just because it reminded me how small I was. How much sky is really out there. How much of the world moves on without us even knowing it. That river, that gravel bar, that moment. It stays with me. A snapshot. And here's the thing that still gets me. That white light, that impossibly huge light that moved across the sky with no sound and no trail. Just clean, brilliant light. I swear I would have followed it anywhere. We had already done 3 spring vacations in the Adirondacks before, and by the time we planned this one, I was starting to get tired of the woods. My ex, well, he wasn't my ex at the time, loved hiking, fishing, and all that. He lived for the peace and quiet, the kind of silence you only find in deep woods where there's no phone signal, just birds, bugs, and the sound of wind moving through trees. I used to like that too, but after a while, I started missing the sounds of the city, or at least the consistency of knowing I could go get a cup of coffee that wasn't made from an instant packet in lukewarm water boiled on a tiny propane stove. Still, I went. I always went. I liked the parts where we got to sit next to each other on big flat rocks by rivers and eat peanut butter sandwiches. I liked the campfires too, even if they always made my clothes smell like smoke for days. That trip, we picked a loop trail around a lake that was supposed to be about 6 miles. Nothing too rough, with a small waterfall marked as a halfway feature. There was only one way in and one way out, a single trailhead, and it had just barely opened for the season. I remember it was early spring, probably late April. Some patches of snow still clung to the edges of the trail in the shaded parts, and the air had that sharp, wet bite to it, like the forest was still trying to shake off winter. Everything smelled damp. The kind of cold mud and moss smell that gets into your boots and socks before you even realize your feet are wet. I was already having a rough time. The night before, I'd been puking on and off in the little campsite bathroom. Probably bad gas station food from the drive up, or maybe I hadn't cooked the chicken properly. I was dehydrated, my stomach hurt, and every step felt like a chore, but I didn't want to be the one who called it off, so I kept going. The trail started simple, just a wide dirt path with some down branches and slick rocks. Nothing we hadn't seen before. The first couple of miles were quiet. No one else on the trail, probably because the park rangers hadn't gotten around to full cleanup yet, so it was a bit overgrown in some places. We kept walking and I kept trying to shake the lingering nausea. I didn't talk much, just focused on not slipping or gagging. My ex led the way, excited as always, pointing out fresh deer tracks and early buds on trees like it was our first hike, not our 10th. We got to a spot where the trail curved along a ridge above the lake, and that's when it started. At first, it sounded like something thumping through the trees off to our left, not like twigs snapping or leaves rustling, but like the sound of something heavy hitting the ground. Once, twice, then again faster, like it was getting closer. You know the feeling when something makes your body go cold before you even fully register what it is? That's what happened. I stopped walking. My legs locked up without me telling them to. Then I heard the second sound. It was this low, throaty rumble. Not a growl, not like a dog. It was deeper, like it was coming from inside something big. It rose in pitch and volume in this rapid climb that sounded totally wrong, almost synthetic, but not quite. Like if you took the sound of a bear growling and mixed it with a big sheet of metal being bent in slow motion. It didn't make sense. It didn't sound like anything I'd heard before. I froze. Then my body just moved. My brain didn't think it through. I turned and started running down the trail without a word. I remember seeing my own arms pumping in front of me like they weren't mine, My pack bounced on my back, and I almost tripped over a root sticking out of the trail. My breath got stuck in my throat. My vision tunneled. All I could think was that something huge was coming through the trees behind us, and it was angry or hungry or both. I ran like that for maybe 30 seconds before I had to stop, lungs burning. My legs felt like jelly. I bent over, gagging, not sure if I was going to puke again. I looked back, expecting to see something crashing through the trees, but there was nothing. The forest was silent again, just leaves and the sound of the wind in the upper branches. No birds, no animals, just quiet. He caught up with me a minute later. I didn't even look at him. I was staring at the direction we'd just come from, trying to hear anything that might be following us. I couldn't bring myself to go back that way. No matter how irrational it was, I wasn't turning around. The loop only had one trailhead, and going back meant passing through whatever that was. I refused. We had a basic paper map, and we could see there was a marshy area, sort of a bog that ran parallel to the far side of the lake. No trail through it, but we figured if we cut across and bushwhacked, we could meet the loop again closer to the exit. It was a bad call, but it felt better than the alternative. The forest thinned as we moved toward the bog. The trees gave way to patches of standing water and thick grass. We followed deer tracks at first, hoping they'd lead us to firmer ground. The bog was a mess. Cold water seeped into our boots almost immediately. Every step felt like pulling ourselves out of wet cement. I lost a boot at one point and had to fish it out with my hand. My legs were caked in mud up to my knees. The only thing that kept me going was the image of getting back to the car and never coming back to these woods again. We didn't talk, not a word. I just kept moving forward, eyes locked on the horizon. Trees in the distance meant dry land, and dry land meant the trail. I moved like a machine, just lift, pull, step, repeat, one foot after the other. Even when my leg sank almost thigh deep and I had to drag it out by lying flat and pushing with my arms, I didn't stop. We made it out of the bog just as the sun was starting to dip low. The light got that orange tinge that meant we had maybe an hour before full dark. Our legs were scraped and bruised. We were soaked, filthy, exhausted, but we were back on the loop. I could see the edge of the path, flattened and muddy, with old boot prints sunk into it. I could have cried. Maybe I did. I don't remember. We limped the last stretch back to the car without looking back. The parking lot was empty except for our own car. The only sound was the engine turning over when we got inside and started it. I stared out the window the whole way back to the main road. I felt hollow, like something in me had gotten stripped away in the bog and left behind. At the motel that night, I just lay in bed in my dirty clothes. I didn't even shower. I couldn't stop shaking. I didn't sleep. That trip broke something in me. We didn't hike again for a long time after that. And when we did, I insisted it be somewhere familiar, somewhere with other people, with cell service, with more than one way out. We broke up a year later. Nothing dramatic, just drifted apart. I think that trip had something to do with it. He wanted to keep pushing out into wilder, quieter places. I didn't. It wasn't until years later that I heard that sound again. I was playing nature sounds while doing some work. Just a background track from a playlist. Wind, birds, trees rustling. Then it happened. That sound. That deep, hollow thumping rumble followed by a sharp, fast mechanical growl. It hit me like ice water. My whole body went cold. I ripped off my headphones and just sat there, frozen. It was a ruffed grouse, a mating display. They beat their wings on their chest so fast that it creates this low-frequency thump that echoes through the forest. It's bizarre, unnatural, especially if you don't know what it is. The growl, just a weird echo from the rapid air displacement, like a sonic illusion, totally harmless. I laughed when I found out, a real full laugh. I had nearly lost my mind over a bird trying to get laid, but the fear had been real, every moment of it. And even now, knowing the truth, I still don't like hiking in the spring anymore. I never went back to that trail, never even looked up where it was. I don't care what bird it was. I just know how it felt, real, terrifying, and cold in a way I never want to feel again. And now, whenever someone says they love the peace and quiet of the forest, I smile and nod, but I always think of that sound. Because the forest isn't quiet. Not really. It was March of 1985 when we went down the river. I was 20, almost 21, and restless with everything. School, home, routines, all of it. Spring break was coming up, and the idea of sitting in my hometown again for a week made my skin itch. I wasn't interested in beach parties or fake IDs, like some of the others in my dorm. I just wanted to be gone, disappear into something quiet, away from highways and televisions and fluorescent lights. Mark, a guy I knew from a few shared courses, mentioned a rafting trip he and a few of his friends were putting together. A slow river through a strip of native land. It'd take about a week, give or take a day. The river itself wasn't one of the famous ones. You didn't find it in tourist brochures. It was wide in some parts, narrow in others, with sandbars, rock shelves, and cottonwood groves scattered throughout its route. The water didn't move fast enough to be dangerous most of the time, but it did move. It was enough to carry you forward if you didn't fight it. We left in 2 vehicles, an old wood-paneled station wagon and a rust-colored Ford pickup with a cracked windshield. There were 6 of us in total. Nobody was particularly experienced, but we had some camping background and had read enough to feel confident. We borrowed 2 inflatable rafts and 1 green canoe, brought our own dry bags, and packed light. Just food that could survive without refrigeration, water purification tabs, sleeping bags, tents, and first aid. We took everything we thought we needed, and, as always, missed a few things we didn't realize were necessary until it was too late. The put-in spot was on the edge of Bureau of Land Management territory, the sort of place with a metal sign full of bullet holes and nothing else. From there, the river meandered south and east, through deep canyons and open desert country, before threading through reservation land that we'd gotten permission to pass through. The exit point was a gravel ramp near a dusty road, where Mark's cousin promised to pick us up 7 days later. The first few days were everything we'd hoped for. Quiet water, clear skies, mornings that started with frost on the tents, and afternoons so warm you had to strip to shorts and sleeves. The air was dry, and it smelled like sage and sun-baked dust. We saw deer twice, and once a group of wild horses watching us from the ridgeline above a canyon. There were old pictographs carved into some of the sandstone outcrops, spirals, handprints, and animal shapes. We didn't touch them, just looked and moved on. The nights were cold and clean. You could hear everything. The creak of tree limbs, the pop of rocks shifting, the soft slap of water against the shore. We kept to our plan. Paddle by day, make camp by late afternoon. We'd pull the boats up onto dry land, lay out our tents and pads, cook dinner from a shared stash of rice, beans, pasta, and canned stuff, and talk a little before heading to bed. We weren't there to party. We wanted quiet. We wanted time to stretch out our brains and not think about papers or deadlines or fluorescent lights. I remember the 5th night especially well. We'd found a wide gravel bar that jutted out into a bend in the river. The current wasn't fast there, and the bank behind us sloped up to a rise covered in low brush. The opposite bank was steep, 20 or 30 feet of eroded sandstone, topped with juniper and twisted scrub trees. There were no trails, no roads. We were miles from anything, and the sky was absolutely enormous. Dinner was lentils and rice with some dried onions stirred in. We ate early, washed our mess kits in the river with biodegradable soap, and stowed all the food and trash in sealed bags, packed into dry barrels. We took turns hanging them high in the limbs of a squat cottonwood, just in case. A few of the others settled into their tents not long after sunset, talking in low voices, their laughter getting softer as they drifted off. The river whispered to itself. I wasn't tired yet. The night was too beautiful to waste. The moon was new, completely gone from the sky, and the stars were so bright they didn't seem real. The Milky Way arced overhead like some kind of ancient memory. I dragged my sleeping pad out onto the open gravel and laid back, arms folded under my head, breathing slow. I listened to the sounds. Tiny lapping waves, the occasional owl, and once, the crack of a branch somewhere behind the camp that made the hairs on my arms rise. But nothing followed it. The sky felt endless. Not just big, but like you could fall into it. I found Orion right away, then Cassiopeia. There was no light pollution out here, no glow from cities, not even from distant farmhouses, just blackness and stars. I felt peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in years. And then I saw it. A light appeared on the far western edge of the sky, low and still. For half a second, I thought it was the moon rising, something huge and pale coming up over the ridge. But then it moved. It didn't rise. It glided. The thing was enormous. I don't mean large like a bright planet or even the full moon. I mean huge, like someone had set a bonfire in the sky and pushed it along silently. The white light didn't flicker. It burned clean, like magnesium, and left a long, ghostly trail behind it. Faint, like a smear of chalk. It didn't streak across the sky the way meteors usually do. I'd seen plenty of shooting stars in my life. This didn't blink out after a second or two. It moved like it had intention. Not fast, not slow, just steady, like it knew where it was going. It crossed the entire arc of the night in what felt like maybe a minute, maybe 90 seconds. I don't know. Time bent around it. After a few seconds, I sat up. Then I stood. Then I shouted, though I don't remember what I said. Maybe just a name. Maybe just a sound. I kept yelling, my voice loud and sharp against the dark. The others stirred in their tents. One of them cursed. Another groaned. But by the time anyone came out to see, the light had already sunk past the eastern horizon and was gone. Silence. That deep, primal kind of silence that follows a storm or a gunshot. A pause in the universe. I stood there for a long time, barefoot on the cold gravel, staring at the spot where it had disappeared. There was no explosion, no sound, nothing in the sky to show where it had been, not even a glow. Eventually I sat back down, then lay back again, heart still pounding. My eyes searched the stars. Nothing. In the morning, I told the others what I'd seen. They listened, half interested, still groggy from sleep. One of them said I probably saw a meteor. Another said it might have been space junk, some Russian satellite burning up. I didn't argue. What could I say? I wasn't sure myself. But deep down, it hadn't felt like either of those things. Felt different. That day on the water was quiet. The weather stayed perfect, bright and dry. We didn't talk much. I kept scanning the sky now and then, but it never showed again. By the time we reached the takeout spot 2 days later, I felt like I'd stepped back from something I couldn't name. I felt changed, not in a mystical way, just aware. Aware of how wide the sky is, aware of how small we are when no one's watching, aware that there's more moving overhead than we can ever count. It wasn't aliens, it wasn't ghosts, it wasn't magic, just light and speed and space. But I'll tell you something. I'd seen meteors before, streaks of orange and white lasting a second or two. I'd seen comets too, and satellites. I knew the look of man-made machines moving in orbit. This wasn't that. It was too bright, too large, too silent. It didn't fall, traveled. It made me feel like I was standing at the edge of something sacred and vast, and I had no right to be there. And when I say that I would have followed it to Bethlehem, I mean it, because that's exactly how it felt, like a sign, like a path lit not for wonder or science, but for something older, something buried deep in our bones. Not because it meant salvation or glory or even understanding, but because in that moment it was all there was, just a light in the dark, and I would have followed it.